Hi everyone. Today I would like to walk you through Shiny Decisions. This was my entry to last year's Shiny contest from RStudio. In case you don't know, Shiny Decisions is a card swiping game built in Shiny where you play the role of a world leader that has to make some tough decisions in order to keep some of the world metrics balanced. A bit more about me. My name is Pedro. I'm a Shiny developer with Appsilon for the last 3 years. Before that, I worked as a web developer for quite a long time, and I'm also an open source creator and contributor for a few packages. Uh, if you would like to reach out, you can find me in most common social networks. So if you have any questions or would like some more information, just get in touch. A bit about what I will cover today. I will talk a bit about the motivation of building this in Shiny, some of the features that I believe are quite interesting and you could probably reuse in your own applications, a bit how I structured the code, some of the ways that I achieved some of the behavior in the application, a bit how the styling was achieved. I will also talk a bit about how the data is stored and what kind of database I'm using, and I will also leave some references in case you would like to know more. Motivation. Uh, why build the game with Shiny? The truth is, Shiny is an extremely flexible framework, and a lot of what Shiny does in the browser is actually very related to how the a normal website actually works. So this means that integrating even existing JavaScript and CSS libraries is usually very simple. And most of all, simply because it's fun. It's a nice exercise of how and what can we actually achieve with Shiny when we want to try to build something a bit more complex. So some of the features that I believe are quite interesting when it comes to Shiny decisions. I reused and extended a lot of existing CSS frameworks for styling. I also created a lot of custom HTML structure related to those frameworks. I also did a lot of work with hooking existing JavaScript code for some of the behavior, and I managed to integrate it with Shiny using custom messages. When it comes to the data, I'm using Google Spreadsheets as a database. This was actually quite interesting because it lets you see and manipulate the data even without having to rely on an actual database. And finally, a lot of the application is structured using R6 modules. This was quite nice when it comes to reusing and modularizing the code as much as possible. So a bit about the code structure. Uh, as you can see, a lot of the code itself is split into these managers, and basically these managers are R6 classes, R6 objects that have their own internal state and their own internal methods. This means that we can easily track individual states for each individual module, and we can also make them talk with each other quite easily. For styling, I used SASS. SASS is basically an upgraded version of CSS that lets you use a lot of the things that you are used to as a programmer, such as variables, loops, that you don't really have access to in your normal CSS code. And finally, I also used heavily the www folder from Shiny, mostly for assets, but also for scripts and for the generated CSS styles. One interesting challenge was this card swiping mechanism. This was actually achieved using Hammer.js, which is a JavaScript library that lets you deal with any kind of input that goes beyond the simple click. And in this case, using Hammer.js and a bit of custom code, I was able to create the behavior itself. And then I was able to connect it to Shiny using Shiny's send input message and set input value as ways to communicate the what's happening between Shiny and the browser. The JavaScript itself and these set input values are sent from JavaScript to the corresponding R6 managers, and the manager itself knows which kind of events it needs to trigger depending on what kind of event it gets. Another example of this costume behavior was the color of the map changing depending on how bad your metrics actually look like. So as you can see, the closer you are to losing the game, the more out of tone the map actually becomes. And this was done similarly using send costume message and set input value, but also by applying some custom CSS to the map itself. When it comes to styling, the base of the application itself is a CSS framework called nes.css, and this is a very retro 8-bit style that already comes with a lot of built-in styles for progress bars, for inputs, for small components. I then extended this using SASS to manage a lot of the changes, and this allowed me to achieve the look that you see. I also ended up doing a lot of custom styling when it comes to the layout itself. So the application is actually responsive. So you'll see a different layout if you're using it on a desktop or if you're using it on a mobile device. The fact that we are able to create all of these custom styles without any limitations means that we can tweak things exactly how we want. Uh, when it comes to SaaS, so how can you actually use SaaS with Shiny? RStudio actually has its own RSaaS library that actually lets you use a lot of the functionalities from SaaS directly in Shiny. So in this case, they have a big SaaS function that can take either a SaaS string or a full file and will actually compile that SaaS version of the styles into a minified CSS file that you can then add to your Shiny application. In the case of Shiny Decisions, this means that we can keep all of our styles separated inside of a styles folder, and we can then call this SASS function to compress all of those styles by using the SASS function and giving it a specific output. After we have this output created, we can then simply insert it into our UI for the Shiny application as the only style file that we're actually using. When it comes to the application state and the data itself, as I said before, I used R6 quite extensively in this application. The reason for that is because I wanted to have very individual modules where each module would take care of its own state and its own methods. This means that using reactive values inside of an R6 module, we can actually have each instance of an R6 have its own individual state, completely separate from any other instance of the same R6 class. This also means that we can have methods internal to the actual module, to the R6 module, or external in case these are modules that can be called from other parts of the application. When it comes to the data, I ended up using a Google spreadsheet as the database for the application, mostly because I wanted to test out the Google Sheets package and see how it connected, but also because I felt that a full database was a bit of overkill just to manage a couple of strings and the different cards. This actually had the added benefit that I could, even during development, quickly tweak the data directly on the Google spreadsheet and see the results almost instantly in the application itself. Lastly, I would like to leave you with a couple of references in case you would like to know more. So, if you don't know the Shiny contest by now, definitely check out last year's gallery. There's a lot of really interesting projects, a lot of really nice implementations. And if you're simply looking for inspiration or for some interesting ideas, for sure you'll find them there. Secondly, if you're only interested in the code, you can check the Shiny Decisions repository on GitHub. There's links and explanations for a lot of the stuff that I did, and especially for all the external resources that I used. Also, if you're simply just interested in testing the app, it's currently deployed on Shiny Apps. So definitely check it out, take it for a spin, and go back to GitHub if you find any issue or if you have any idea of how you'd like to improve it. Finally, if you want to know a bit more about the process, there's a blog post in the Appsilon blog, mostly about the process and uh, what went into building this application. If you would like to reach out or if you have any more questions, feel free to reach me through any social media. Or if you just want to check out my other work, also feel free to just send me an invite or a message through whatever social network you would like. Thank you and see you soon.